All right, folks, we're going to get going. We are starting on time. It's shocking, but we're going to do it. So hello, good morning. I'm Jenny Lay-Flurrie. I am here to talk about the lovely world of inclusion, and specifically a lens on disability. I'm going to give you a whiz-bang into what we've been up to in this space and how we've created really an embedment of disability accessibility into the fabric and culture of Microsoft. So I'm going to walk you through the key components that we've had to get there. We're going to spend a good chunk of time demoing some of the products and the features, and also hearing from a key customer and how they have been embracing some of this schnizzle and putting it into what they're doing. So you've got a fun 75 minutes coming up, and I'm going to get going. And I'm going to get going with a couple of the basics. So for those that are in this gig, forgive me, I will get through this quickly, but it is important to ground ourselves in why the heck we do this stuff. And there's really a couple of key things for this. One is to wallow for a second in the definition of disability. The definition of disability, if you look at the 80s, if anyone remembers that, was a little different to how it is today. In the 80s, which is when I was growing up, because I am that bloody old, the definition was that disability was very much a personal health condition. You were impaired, you were slightly broken. And whatever your disability was, if you actually look it up in Webster's dictionary, because at least last week that's where it still was, because they still had the 1980s definition, there were a lot of bad words associated with disability. Words that I never suggest you use, by the way. That definition changed. World Health Organization actually shifted it to be more of a mismatch between the individual and the environment in which they're in. That shifts our whole focus on accessibility. It becomes a design challenge, and it becomes something that a nerdy techie company like ours needs to bloody focus on. And so when you think about this in pragmatic reality, there's one example that just makes this real for me. I see this all the time, but just to share a little bit, maybe overshare. And this quote is from a friend of mine, but I love it. Stairs make the building inaccessible, not the wheelchair. This was brought home to me when I went back. I went down to New Zealand. My mum's British, so am I, not Australian. And I went down to visit Mum, who emigrated, and she is a power wheelchair user. She's developed a spinal condition. She's joined the Cool Gang, and we wanted to take her away for her 70th. She wanted to go somewhere where she could paint. We booked a rental house. We checked in advance that it was going to be great for a power wheelchair, open plan, beautiful rental, no issues with her getting around the property. Drove 6 hours, get there, one very small minor problem, or in the words of the rental agent, we wondered if this would be a challenge. There were 4 stairs to get in. Now, Mum's power wheelchair, you're talking 350 pounds. You can't lift that sucker, I tried. And I tried not on my own, but with my hubby and my better half. And we couldn't lift it. It took us 2 days and 6 visits to a Home Depot kind of equivalent to find a ramp. It was humbling, and that rental agent got an education in accessibility. The better way of approaching this is by design. It's embedding it into the culture and fabric of how they do it. You're not just cutting off people with power wheelchairs, you're cutting off people who use strollers. Anyone with wheels. I love this one. It's not just because I'm British. I just think this is a really cool ramp. This is St. Paul's Cathedral. Anyone heard of that? Yeah. It's really wicked, and you come off a wobbly bridge, and you're trying to go straight to the cathedral, and this ramp is, well, my daughter calls it the yellow brick road, because it leads straight to the cathedral. It's beautifully integrated. It is the epitome of beautiful design. It's also gorgeously accessible. And I think this just really, really grounds why we're in this gig. We're also in this gig because it's big. This is 1 billion folks around the world. It's something that you can come to at any time. If you are not in my Cool Gang today, you probably will be in your lifetime, sorry. It's something that traverses what you can see and what you cannot. Most of disability, over 70%, is invisible. And that's anything from deafness, blindness, right the way through to cognitive and mental health. You wouldn't know it looking at me. You just think I'm very cool, sassy, smart, mildly funny, and clearly very humble. but I'm actually profoundly deaf. My disability is very invisible. Now, you'd probably pick it up in my speech over time, and you'd more pick it up because of my sign language interpreter. But most of disability you wouldn't know by looking. It's also one that's got some pretty humbling demographics behind it. Unemployment rate is double that of people without disabilities. That's something that also makes this a market that we want to be in. Because fundamentally, we believe that technology can bloody well impact that. That's twice I've said bloody, I will be done. So we've been in this gig a long time. About 20 years ago, Bill Gates actually started this off. But we also have reinvested in this space in a pretty big way. About 3 years ago, we kind of said, let's go. We looked at the business case. We looked at what was happening in the industry. We saw the unemployment rate and really started to refocus here. And the first gig when you do that is to wallow in what your values are, right? So these are just the things that we stay completely grounded to whenever you're in those tough conversations. We want to be inclusive of everyone. We want to be transparent in what we're doing, because ultimately the tech we produce can impact life, can impact work, and we also want to be accountable and stay very humble to those demographics. And these are the 4 pillars in which we've been able to do that. And this is really where we're going to spend the substance of our time, is walking through the features and the gigs that we've used to create this culture. There's 4 here. You can't acronym them. I've tried. CSPF doesn't really roll off the tongue. Mental note to fix that for future acronyms. But hopefully by the end, you'll get a sense of how we've sort of embedded this, because it's not just about an engineering process. This is about making sure that it's fundamentally integrated. And for us, that meant getting it into the hearts, minds, systems, processes, and culture of a company of 135,000 nerds. Nerds being a very complimentary term. And so there's some stuff here that really does matter. The first is culture. Now, this may not be the top thing on your list, but humor me, will you, for a minute when I just walk it through. Because culture can mean tons of different things. For us, knowing that we want to make sure that all of our products, websites, services, events, anything we produce is inclusive and accessible, it means a couple of key things. And these are some of the things that we've done to make sure that it's embedded, DNA embedded. One is employee resource groups. Who knows of ERGs? A few here. So employee resource groups, we have about 8 in the company. Women at Microsoft, blacks at Microsoft, disability at Microsoft. It's also how I got into this schnizzle. I actually joined the company 13 years ago in London to work on Hotmail. Does anyone remember the butterfly? Okay, I'm moving on now. For the first 7 years of my career, I worked on Hotmail and Messenger and Bing and online advertising. And I had this great big illusion as I came into Microsoft that it would be a great company for someone with very fastly declining deafness. And great because Microsofties don't talk to one another, right? I quickly found that was not the case. And actually, people did want to talk a lot with different accents and very fast. In fact, my dad constantly reminds me that my speech has sped up to about 3 times where it should be since I started at the company. That's a challenge for a deaf girl. And so I joined the deaf group. I then joined every other group and found that there were these crazy conversations happening. There were 6 groups back then. There's 15 groups now. And those groups are very empowered. They're not just empowered. You don't have to have accessibility in your job title. They are empowered to bring their schnizzle and their expertise, whether they're a parent, a relative, or a person, into whatever job they do. And I think it's become a source of expertise. In fact, there are so many asks for these guys' time to test a product, they cannot fulfill them. And so one of the big events we have kind of tells the story. We have an Ability Summit. We actually opened it up to the public for the first time ever this year. It's been running for 8 years. And 8 years ago, we like to say there were 80 people in the room, but the truth is that it was more like 20. We just added them up. It was small, and I thought that was a blazing success. This year, there were 1,200 people in the room. And this panel actually had, well, there's Senator Harkin. For anyone who is in the industry, he is the godfather of the ADA, as well as our previous governor, our president, the head of the university, UW, just some amazing folks who were all there to talk about the importance of inclusion, accessibility, and what they were doing and what they needed help with. It's become a powerhouse, so I can't understate the importance of an ERG. I also can't understate the importance of inclusive hiring. Now, we've been doing this a long time. There's several folks in our company and in our ERG that have been in their jobs for over 20, 25 years. But we've also kicked it up a notch. We kicked it off in 3 areas. One is autism. We did some research. We found out that this was probably the most underserved talent pool that is out there right now. You've got unemployment, underemployment rate of 80 to 85%. Whoa. But an education talent bar and a skill bar that's very high. And so we basically looked into why that was and found out that the interview process was the killer. So we ditched it. Instead, we hire people through an academy. That academy is brought in, it's small so far, about 60 folks. 50% of our hires had previously applied to Microsoft and not got through the front door, right? Because that interview process is not going to allow someone with autism to show their math skills. We've also been looking at intellectual disability, so we have a supported employment program in 8 locations in Redmond. That program has about 200 hires, really low attrition rate, like really low. And so it's become not just a nice thing to do, but a business imperative. And then looking at pan disability, and let me be clear on the gold dust. Gold dust for accessibility is hiring a blind developer. And it shouldn't be rocket science, if you do the math. If you hire a blind developer, you are creating accessible code by design. You don't have to learn what you need to add to your HTML, right? A blind developer will just put it in. So we're constantly looking at ways that we can spur the industry, not just in that area, but across, to bring more talent into the workplace. Training, you gotta learn this stuff. I thought I knew some about my own dev gig, but I don't know about other areas of disability. I'm constantly learning, and accessibility can be learned. We embed it into all of our mandatory training, and not just kind of including a person with a disability in the video, and not a hospital wheelchair, by the way, a proper one, but also embedding the key principles of accessibility, making sure that people understand their responsibility, whatever they work on. It could be a piece of marketing collateral, a website. It still has to be accessible. And we're flipping a ton of our training external right now. So all of these links you'll see at the end, but our accessibility at a glance is a really cool one. We've been doing a bunch of 2-minute videos because we found that that's kind of the attention span. But 2-minute cartoon videos that talk about how to create an inclusive presentation, how to go and look at a website, whatever it may be. And we're flipping more and more of our content that we've been doing internally to be externally available. In fact, our 101 course, which has been taken across the company, we've truncated and ripped out all of the Microsoft gubbins and the acronyms that, if you're not an employee, you don't need, and we put that on YouTube. And then inclusive design. Who's heard of inclusive design? All right, go check this out. From a technical perspective, right the way through to any other aspect, there's one key principle of accessibility. If you embed it and try and do it at the end of your dev cycle when you're trying to ship a product, you are going to have a ridiculous extreme cost and time. If you include accessibility into the beginning of how you dev and code, you're going to have potentially around 1% additional. The same as if you're trying to do it for an accessibility of an environment. You just add this into your budget and creating an event and putting captioning and other stuff that's important for disability, and you're not trying to do it the night before, you're going to have a much better experience. Inclusive design are a series of toolkits to help you do that. They're the basic starter kits for anyone, regardless of role. Things like how to create an inclusive playground. Just wallow in that, and wallowing in the personas you have to create. So that's culture. Right, some of the things that you can do to really infuse your culture. Let's shift and talk about systems. What do I mean by systems? Well, the first thing is really, let's talk about org. I'm the CAO. I moved into that role 2.5 years ago. And when we really rebooted our efforts, we took the shot to move that office and my team into our corporate external legal affairs. It was previously actually in Windows. Now, we found that that wasn't the right place for it because it's very hard to influence other product teams when you sit in a product team. We moved it to a division, but really my goal, my team is focused on one set of things, but more important is how I partner across each of those product teams and marketing and HR and anything else you can think of. I actually have an accessibility leadership team, a series of peers. You're going to meet one in a minute. We work together to figure out what we need to go tackle, and I hold people accountable in a very carrot and stick orientated way. I manage scorecards for sure. I manage this like a business, but I also am incentivizing anyone on that group and the people on their teams that work on accessibility to go further than compliance, to go further than any legal standard, because the law is always behind customer experience. And so it's a hub and spoke, right? I am held to account, but I am not going to be driving accessibility of Windows. The Windows team has got that. My job is to partner to help, and if we don't deliver on it, I may poke. But it's a hub and spoke, and we found that to be the scalable model for us that works. There's tons of other models. Every company is different, and I found that the accessibility team does sit in multiple different parts. But the accountability for driving accessibility within a product should be with a product owner. And this is beginning to net us results that come outside of product, right? We're going to spend some time going through product in a second, but I just want to point out a couple of those components that have come out of this. One is real estate and facilities. They really took this on, like big. They were getting feedback from the ERG. They were constantly getting feedback. They were getting feedback from us, right? My team happens to be 90% disability. By the way, I didn't know that when I hired them. They were 50% when I hired. I found out a year later because people felt safe to identify. It was around 90%. And they really have influenced this team. So this team is now embedded all manner of, not just ADA, which is the American standard, but above ADA principles into design of our new buildings and refurb. So that's stuff like tactile strips from curb to the front door. If you go into any of our kitchen areas, you'll find low vision signage and braille on everything. Coffee, tea, very important, right the way through to cancer pop. You'll also see we've made changes in our common areas. We used to have a lot of these high bar things. Really not good when it comes to wheelchairs, even though a lot of the wheelchairs can go up and down now. So we have lots of different height stuff. And also we looked at the colors. We found that having beautifully designed colors where your furniture matches the same color as your wall and your floor, not so good when it comes to accessibility. Lots of trips. Right, so fixing some of that. And even ramps have been embedded into our treehouse, which for us was just like the, oh my gosh. You know, when we know that we've got culture really starting to take hold is when our meeting rooms, and we do have tree houses at Microsoft, we pretend to be cool, but we are really. You can now get into those with wheelchairs and they're fully accessible and have your meeting there. That's awesome, right? That's not just meeting a bar, that's going beyond. And marketing's also been doing the same thing, and you may be feeling some of this. In fact, I hope you are a little bit this week, because there's a couple of things here that I think have really helped. Stuff like captioning, which you'll see embedded on everything we're doing. Our commercials, that's Swether, who's actually one of our leaders of our deaf group, and what she does. We've actually put quiet spaces in for the first time in Ignite. And actually at Build, anyone go to Build here? Which is our developer conference in May, we actually had a silent disco with 6,500 people, right? Because the noise was just, we got a ton of feedback, so the team went and created something, to the point where our CMO is actually doing a presentation right now on inclusive marketing, right? We know that we've got it through the product process when you've got it into other parts of the company. So with that, let's wallow in the products a little bit, and I want to bring up a friend and colleague, Clint, who's been very much on the journey with me throughout the last few years, and allow him to walk you through some of the schnizzle that's come out of it.
Thanks, Jenny. It's great to be with you here today. I want to start off by telling a story about when this work started to really resonate with me and changed my perspective as an engineering leader. We had just shipped Office 2016, and we were starting to take stock about what we were going to build looking forward. And we were looking at a lot of different areas, and one of the things I was doing is going out and doing research around how we're doing in accessibility. I went to one of Jenny's Ability Summit conferences. It's a great opportunity to bring people from all across the company and listen and really learn about how the work that we do on the engineering side impacts people. And I met a lady who told me about, she was a project manager and she was also blind. She told me about how she had recently taken a class at the local community college on Microsoft Project. She felt like that would be a great way for her to strengthen her skills as a project manager. She had to drop that class because Project was not accessible to the third-party screen reader. And for me, that was this light turned on moment as an engineer about how the decisions that we make on the engineering side have this direct implication to if someone can get an education, hold a job, get promoted, and thrive in the workplace. So on the product side, it's been a great journey. And I think if I had one thing that I could share with you over the journey, it's been this learning that when you create products that are usable by people who have disabilities, you create products that are better for everybody. And that's one of those things that I've seen time and time again. And when I look at the things that I use every day, time and time again, I come back and find that the underlying tech or the underlying things we were doing in that area were inspired by people who have disabilities. But that magic in your project doesn't happen if you try to think about accessibility as something that you bolt on after the fact. That magic can happen in your product if you think about it as something that's built in from the beginning, as something that's included in the design phase. And when you think about your products, not about just being compliant, but really being usable. And usable for me is that people with disabilities can be efficient. They can efficiently create complete common tasks. When we started the effort, Jenny talked a little bit about this reboot that has been happening in the company. We sat back and we had our Microsoft mission. That's to empower every person and organization on the planet. And that when I started thinking about it in context of people with disabilities and the work that we're doing in this space, that mission started to mean a lot more to me. But we needed something that's going to be a little more concrete from the engineering side that we could move forward with to be able to execute. And so we came up with these two goals. The first one is that people with disabilities can communicate, consume, and create content on any device. And this is a brand promise that if we're going to build an experience, we're going to ship it to our customers, it's going to be accessible. Whether that's in a Windows desktop, an iOS app, Mac, web, Android, we're just committed that whatever experiences we put out are going to be accessible from the beginning. The second part is that it's easy for everyone to create accessible content and to engage in inclusive meetings. This is one of those ones where we had to think about it a little bit because we thought, well, if we did a great job of building these great accessibility tools inside of our products and supporting third-party, AT, assistive technology, and a first-party experience, haven't we kind of done the work there? But when you look at the life cycle of an employee, if the documents, the presentations, the content that they're looking to use is not accessible, then we really haven't achieved our mission to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And so what you have to do is you have to go back and think about how the content that we create, how do we make that easier to create? So as part of this engineering surge, on the engineering side, we had such fabulous support from Satya and his leadership team. They really encouraged us to lean in this area and to do some of our best work. And they made intentional decisions not to fund some things that we really wanted to do to make sure that this is an area where we excelled in. The work on the engineering teams impacted nearly every team. We've invested in our own first-party platforms to make sure that we have great out-of-the-box assistive technology. We fixed thousands of bugs, and in places where you couldn't just fix bugs, we rewrote entire accessibility layers in the application. We published hundreds of conformance statements that make it easy for you to procure and deploy accessible solutions that are some of the most transparent in the industry. And we've started to identify and cultivate features that are not just great for people with disabilities, but that have this broad impact in everybody's life. And I'm going to show some of those that I use on a regular basis. But as Jenny talked about, the story at Microsoft in accessibility, at the foundational layer, is really about a culture change. It's about resetting expectations, and it's about changing the way we prioritize and fund projects. I want to tell you, what does that mean for you as an organization that's now consuming Microsoft 365 and Office 365? I want to share a story that started to impress on me the impact that this work is having. We had just done a bunch of work, and we went to Washington, D.C., and we were presenting to a bunch of federal employees about all of the work that we were doing. And during lunch, a gentleman came up and he pulled me aside, and he said, "Clint, I just want to thank you for the work you've done." And I was, well, you're welcome. And he says, I believe, because of the work Microsoft has been doing, that if I lost my job tomorrow, I could easily get another one, and I can support my family. That's the stuff that kind of ties it back to me about the impact that it has. And so we're excited that if your customer, if your employees are using Microsoft 365, that's the most inclusive, accessible version of our products we've ever shipped. And we're empowering them to really bring their best self and do their best at work. When we talk about Microsoft 365, we talk about unlocking creativity, built for teamwork. We talk about simplicity and security and compliance. I just want to walk through some of these areas and just give you a demo of some of the things that I use on a regular basis to be more productive. So this is an article. One of my favorite projects that we have at Microsoft is learning tools. This started as a hackathon project. It was started by somebody who said, hey, there's a lot of research out there on dyslexia. How can we take dyslexia and learn from it and build something that's more inclusive for everybody? This means a lot to me because reading was something I struggled with. When I was in first grade, I started reading quickly, and a teacher set me back and said, oh, you're not reading that fast. And for some reason, in my head, I guess I identified that I wasn't a great reader. By seventh grade, I had a second grade reading level, and I was struggling. I was in a resource class, but I had a teacher, Lee Squires, and a librarian, Mrs. Coombs, that really got me into reading. They gave me the tools that I needed to thrive. And I left 8th grade with a 12th grade reading level. So when it comes to teaching kids to read, I think it's really one of those things that builds an impact and has a lasting impact in someone's life and their ability to excel and thrive. So one of the first things I like to do, this is built into Edge. I love to kind of like focus down on stuff, and so I love to go into reading mode where it can just remove all of the other stuff. But inside of Edge now, we're shipping this new feature called Learning Tools. And Learning Tools is designed for people who have dyslexia, dysgraphia, to help them focus and be able to read better, more efficiently. One of the things we've learned as we study this is not one treatment works for everybody. And so for reading, it becomes this very personalized experience where one thing will work for one person but not for another. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of the bells, a bunch of the knobs that people have to do. I could change the background color. Let's pick something like maybe this, because that works a little better for my eyes. We can do text spacing, so you can see that there's just kind of a different spacing. So for some people, decoding words with a little more spacing makes a big difference. If you're a new learner and you want to start trying to see, let me see all of the nouns in this, then you can turn on the different parts of speech and verbs. And I can also come in and do this single line focus. So if I turn on single line focus, it'll just give me just this very narrow view on top of it. And from there, one of my favorite features is this feature called Read Aloud.
Winning hackathon project is now 9 minutes read. For years, Merlene Graves spent several hours every weekend reading text aloud and recording it for her students who struggled with reading.
And I can change I can
A fourth
change,
grade English language.
I can change the speed, I can change the voice type, I can really personalize this learning experience to work well for me. We are now shipping reading tools in Word, in our text-heavy apps like Word, OneNote, and Edge. I personally love to use it inside of Outlook. Before I send an important mail, I might have 4 or 5 paragraphs. If I turn on reading tools, invariably I will catch 4 or 5 mistakes, whether it's spelling mistakes or places where my brain filled in words that didn't exist. I'll catch them and I'll be able to proof those and do a little bit better job. So learning tools, I think that's a great new capability that's starting to build in our products across everywhere. We redesigned Windows, and in many cases we worked to make the new Ease of Access Center intuitive and natural and easier to find things. So we organized it according to things that help for vision, hearing, interaction models below. This just makes it easier for people to find stuff. And so if you're looking for what are the capabilities inside of Windows, we've now made that a much more natural experience. Color filters is a great new feature that we're built in. I had a coworker the other day who was telling me about colorness. She described, so she had this guy that she quite fancied. She had a date that night, and on a whim, she decided to color her hair red. So she shows up at this date, and the guy doesn't say a word to her. And she's sitting there eating and getting frustrated because she's got bright red hair, and her date's not even acknowledging it. A few minutes into it, or halfway into it, he leans over and he says, "Hey, everybody's looking at us. What's going on?" Turns out he was colorblind. Who would have figured? So while we might not be able to help you identify if your date's got red hair, in Excel, when red really matters, we can help give you some dials that make that a little more natural. So if I turn on color filters, there's a red, green, different tones. And like I said, this becomes a personal thing where based on whatever your capabilities are, we can start adjusting the system so that you can now see Windows through a colored filtered lens. I'll go ahead and turn that back off. Another one of the features that is one of my favorites is PowerPoint Designer. So I have a deck where, this is a more inclusive workplace deck, and it's pretty boring. And from a catchy or getting someone to read it, it's not going to really jump out and grab you. So let's just see what we can do to spicing this up, make it a little more interesting, but also really focus on how do we make it more readable for someone who has cognitive disabilities or actually for me probably. So if I come in here and I go to pictures and I just pick a couple of pictures here, I insert it. What we're going to do is we're going to take these pictures, we're going to go up the cloud, and we're going to start to design some new slides. When the team started off, they thought, what would it be like if we shipped a fantastic designer that could work on your slides and be able to do it in a couple of seconds? But also to do it in a way that makes it easier for people to read. So if you look at this, I can now, with a click of a button, I can reformat the slide. We actually use artificial intelligence to look at the picture, make sure we don't crop it off of faces, to pull colors out and give you different slide alternatives that kind of match the colors of the slide. But it gets a little bit more interesting too. So if we go down to this slide, and this is just, it's got some bullets, but let's see if we could organize that in a way that just makes it a little more intelligent, a little more legible. So in this case, we also start using artificial intelligence to look at the vocabulary that's being used and to pull out an icon that might help draw out and help people make that mental connection to the text and what's being presented. If we take a look at something like a timeline of sessions that are happening throughout the conference, I have some other options that I could pull out. Let's go with this one. And you can see that it now builds a timeline view that gives you the idea of the different sessions that we're doing in accessibility here at the conference. And so it just makes it easier for someone to parse, easier to understand, makes it more intuitive and more natural. So something that, once you start using this, it's hard to go back. And if you had a mobility impairment and you were to try to design a slide like this, I don't know if it'd be, that would take a long time. But you can see with just a few keyboard strokes now, I could go ahead and design something that's beautiful and really present my best self when I'm at work. lot of good things are happening inside of Word. When we started this accessibility work, one of the things we did is we conducted a usability study for people who are blind, and we asked them to just find commands in the ribbon. And I gotta be honest with you, it was painful to watch. Because if they didn't know, if it wasn't a command they used often, it was really hard to find. Well, one of the guys who was working on some of our artificial intelligence and searching work, his father was blind, and so he was really inspired by this, and he started connecting this work with some other work that we now realize as Microsoft Search. So if I come in and I just go Alt-Q, I can set focus in there, and if I wanted to just type table, you can now see that it just starts to search through all of the commands, and it's easy to find some of those long tail commands you don't use on a regular basis. It kind of brings them up to the front. But not only does it do that, it's also a place where I can start to find people. So I could search for people, and from there I could see their activity card, or I could share this document with them. I could search for something like, say, Amazon, and it'll give me a list of documents. And so it starts to search for those documents. If I did a search for something like keyboard shortcuts, I can get help on keyboard shortcuts. We've rewritten our entire library around the content we use to help support people with disabilities to have some of our best content there, because we know that that's an area that they have a high reliance on. And so this is just one place that makes it easier for people to start getting into the different parts of the system. Works really well for people who are blind, but it just makes it a more intuitive, natural place for people to go from one place to find more things. Another thing, I remember when I was in school, I was not a great writer, and that was an area I could solve problems. I was really great at story problems, but when it comes to writing, that create this anxiety and tension. But we've made these changes inside of Editor to now start to take some of that tension and stress out of the act of writing. So if you look at this, you can now see contagious, contiguous, and if I'm like, oh, what does that really sound like?
Contiguous, similar to adjoining, neighboring, touching.
So those synonyms, along with read aloud, helps me be able to pick the word that I'm looking for. We're integrated in Cloud Suggest and some of our intelligence in the cloud to be able to pick up more spelling mistakes than ever before. So if you have common spelling mistakes from dyslexia or from phonics spelling, we're going to start now recognizing more and more words than what we've done in the past. Another great little feature that I like to use, hyperlinks, hard to create. And a lot of times when a screen reader gets it, it's like http : www, and who knows what that means? But for me, I noticed when I was like, one of the jobs I do, people call me as a router, like I just route stuff, and so I'm like constantly pointing people to different documents. And I'd found that just the workflow of like going in the document, copying the URL, coming back and pasting it, and then putting a friendly name with it, it's just painful, it's tiring. So when we thought about how do we do that with less effort, less physical effort, more naturally, you can now come down into the links area, and we have a list of all of the documents you've been using. Or if I had a URL that was and from there I can just pick that. And so it just makes it so easy now to just create a hyperlink that's accessible, it's natural, has less clicks, it's easy to use. So hyperlinks is another great example of just simple features that we're inspired about. How do we take the friction? How do we make people with mobility impairments work faster? How do we make it to where we're taking the stress out of the act of creating a document? Let's talk about creating accessible content. So in part of this surge that we were doing, I had an opportunity to present to a bunch of very senior executives, and it was one of those really intimidating career moments where all eyes were watching me as I was doing this demo, and I was really trying to help them understand the challenges people had using Office. And I have a slide that I brought up. And when I brought this slide up, everybody started laughing in the room. It was like this commotion that just happened. And I pointed out to them that a picture is like worth 1,000 words when you see it. But when everybody else is responding to it and you don't know what's funny or what's happening, you feel left out. You feel excluded. This is a picture of my family, but we didn't make it easy to put the alternative text. So it was a picture of my family dressed as superheroes, but we didn't make it easy to put the alternative text so a screen reader user would be able to understand what is this picture about. And so we did work to elevate that, where if you come in here and you go edit alt text, if I would have done this, when I did this before, it automatically captioned it because it sends a picture up the cloud and then brings down a caption for it. We've done 650 million images since we launched this feature that we've auto-captioned. I'm just going to go ahead and show you what the service will generate for me. A group of people wearing costumes. Not too bad. If I put in Clint's family wearing costumes enough, then the service might be able to train and recognize that this is Clint's family wearing, Batman costumes. So this nature about trying to make it easier for people to create more inclusive content, this image now becomes more searchable, and it gives better signals in the system. So another thing that we did, in 2010, we released this great little feature called the Accessibility Checker. If you go into Accessibility Checker, it'll tell you in the side of this document what are the missing angles. So I can come in here, I can fix this picture. You've already seen how to do that. We're also done work to start recognizing font colors. So we've actually integrated a fix-it menu. So I could come in here, and you can see this. There's a color contrast issue. So I can come in and select that color contrast issue and start fixing that. If I did the picture, I could go edit alt text. I could generate the text for it. It's close-up of a lush green forest. That looks great. If I delete this part here, then the accessibility checker tells me there's no errors. This is an area where we have a lot of great opportunities. We're going to continue to work in this area. This is something we're just, in some ways, just kind of getting started. But we want to make it easier and easier for people to create content that's just accessible by default. And remove that friction around being able to collaborate inclusively with other people. Another great little example that I have is in Outlook OA, Outlook Mail. If I come into the drafts folder, I have the option to come in and say, I prefer to receive accessible content. And that might be because I think accessible content's easier for me to read, easier for me to use with navigation panes, or I might have a disability and need that to be productive in my job. So if I bring up this draft mail that I'm sending to Georgia, you can see that Georgia prefers accessible content. That's something that she's self-said, I prefer. Now, we're not necessarily saying I have a disability. She's just saying I prefer to have accessible content. If you run the accessibility checker here, you'll see that there's an image that must have alt text. So if I come in here and I just put people looking at computer, and I check it again, you can now see that there's no accessibility issues. And I know that I can send this email to her comfortably knowing that she's going to be able to consume that content in the right way. This feature is also coming to Outlook Win32 Mail, and it's something that we're continuing to look at lots of areas where we can help encourage people to create accessible content because the people that they're working with have that special need. The last thing I wanted to show as part of my demos is some work we're doing around translation and auto-translator. We have some of the best tech at taking speech and converting it to tech with our cognitive services. I've uploaded this video, and on the right side, you will see a transcript of the video. The great thing about this transcript is it now makes it much more searchable. So if I'm looking for a specific piece of information, we can now start digging into videos and getting the transcripts out of them. I've turned captions on, and I'm just going to go ahead and put play on this video, and you can watch it, what it picked up.
People say to me, well, I don't have anyone with a disability on my team, and I laugh because 70+% of disability is invisible.
All of us, at some stage in our lives, will have an access need.
Okay, so she had an accent, and she said an access need. And the captioning said, exec snakes. So we got that one wrong. So what we could do is we can come in here. We'll have an and just like that, I've been able to edit that transcription, save it back, and now have a great model for how I'm now starting to share videos inside my organization. And that's through Microsoft Stream that you can get that capability. All right. I got through the demos without any glitches. Woo! Oh, that's always a relief when that happens. So I'll just skip through some of the slides that we have in there for you to refer back to. Simplicity. For me, this is about your organization. If you're using Microsoft 365, Office 365, we're building assistive technology in the beginning. And it's so that people don't have to raise their hand and ask for accommodations. It's just part of the capabilities that the organization provides. And we'll hear later from our friends at TD Bank how this work is starting to impact their organization by just being able to deploy Office 365 and have that out-of-the-box accessible experience. We're focusing a lot on compliance. Some of our customers rely heavily on conformance documentation, so we've spent a lot of time making sure that those are transparent and clear. We've published over 100 of them. There's a lot of momentum. We're starting to see more and more customers adopting Microsoft 365, Office 365, because of the work that it does to change their culture. In June, 2.8 million people used Magnifier. 650 million images have been captioned, and we now have over 3 million people that are using learning tools on a regular basis. The energy that's starting to come, and it's really changing a lot of the conversations we're having in education. But you know, when people with dyslexia, when they leave school and they go to the workplace, that goes with them. And so it's been great to really start to see it have an impact in companies as well. This slide's not really something I expect anybody to read. It's a Microsoft 365 accessible highlights. It's the work that we've done from 2016. We talk about the different features we've released on mobility, cognitive vision, hearing, accessible content. I counted it up, and we've had over 41 blog posts or significant help articles that were written about a new capability that's been built in the system. If I had one thing to leave you with, and that is, if your employees are not using Office 365, Microsoft 365, they're not getting all of the advantages of the capabilities we've been building over the last couple of years. So the faster we can get that out and deploy, the more you're going to start having employees like Peter, like the gentleman came up and said, I'm more employable tomorrow. And this just lets people bring their best self to work and do their best stuff. So let's show a quick little video, and then we'll have a conversation around how this is changing things at TD Bank.
If you don't make your workplace accessible, you're missing out on a huge amount of talent.
TD worked very hard to build a supportive environment. Office 365 makes it a lot easier for people to create accessible documentation. The features are already built in.
It's a game changer to really increase productivity.
Awesome. All right, let's grab stools out here. But first of all, more importantly, thank you, Clint, for wicked demos. And let me welcome and introduce Bert Floyd from TD Bank, who's flown all the way here from Toronto. TD Bank will tell us
Now we can tell you about TD Bank, sure. TD Bank is a finance services company. We're based in Toronto. We've got about 85,000 employees, about 25 million customers. And as a service industry, we need to make sure that we are tied into the needs of our customers very tightly. So it's very important to us to deliver service that is ready to meet the needs of our customers.
And what do you do? Tell us what you do, sir.
Personally, I manage the assistive technologies team. So my job is to make sure the bank's accessible to people with disabilities. That includes our employees as well as our customers.
Now, I know you've been focused on accessibility for over a decade. Why is accessibility such a priority for TD Bank?
Well, when you look at the statistics, about 1 in 5 Americans has a disability. The number's slightly less in Canada, but we're catching up. So that literally means we have millions of customers with disabilities. So it's very important that we take the time to ensure we're delivering service that meets those customers' needs. Because if we're not making it a comfortable experience for those customers, they'll trickle away. They'll find someone else who does. And on the flip side, if we do a really good job at this, we'll actually grow the business. This is a growing market, and it's a huge strategic opportunity for the bank. And on the employee side, we want to hire the best and brightest. And there's some people with disabilities out there that are highly adaptable, creative thinkers. They're problem solvers. They've had to be. And we want to be able to put those people to work at the bank. We want the best and the brightest. And if we're not an accessible work environment, we're basically slamming the door in the face of 1 in 5 people. This doesn't make sense. And very selfishly, it's a priority for me personally because we all acquire disabilities as we age. I pretend I don't need glasses. And I want to make sure that I can continue to keep working, along with my peers, as long as we want to keep working.
So let's make this real. What was the state before versus now? Give some sense of what it was like a decade ago, and what are you doing today? Where are you at today?
Sure. I'll tell you a story. The Inclusion and Diversity program at TD encouraged our businesses to look into hiring more people with disabilities, and they took it seriously and started to do just that. Our retail business actually hired a gentleman who was blind to work in one of our retail branches as a financial advisor. So day one, he came in and said, "Great, I need JAWS, I need Kurzweil, I need a Braille display." And everyone said, "What the heck is that?" So it was
a movie, right, JAWS?
It was a movie.
Yeah,
It's also a screen reader used by persons who are blind. And so we had a really difficult time trying to figure out how do we make that work in our environment. Our retail environment, as you can imagine, is incredibly secure and locked down. And so it took us a few months before that employee was actually up and running effectively. And he was very patient with us as we worked through the process. But my predecessor, Phil Faubert, at the time identified the fact that this is not a great experience. And when we hire people with disabilities, we can't put them through that kind of a weight or that kind of experience. So he actually kicked off the assistive technology program. And then he made me beg and plead for 2 years before he hired me onto the team. It was not a great experience. What we did then was we established standards. We worked with service agencies that support people with disabilities, a lot of the universities and colleges in the area, to try and determine what are the common assistive technologies that are used. And we standardized on those at the bank. We bought them, we pre-certified them, we figured out how do we make all of these things work at the bank. And so when we hire a person with a disability, they just check it off a menu just like they would. I need a laptop, I need an ergonomic keyboard, I need a cell phone, I need an ergonomic mouse. They check them off. They get delivered at about the same time as their laptop arrives. So it's a very equivalent experience.
We were just at Envision, and we were talking about actually the number of folks who've self-identified at TD Bank. Do you want to share a little about that?
Sure. So each year we do an employee survey, and ask people to voluntarily declare if they identify themselves as having a disability, and we're sitting around 6%.
And just to put that in context, that's more than any bank that we know of, right? At this time, is that the right way of framing it?
We're winning, yes.
Just giving you a softball there. It's really impressive, right, to see those kind of numbers. So how are you've got 6% of your workforce that you know of today. How are you helping them to self-accommodate? What are some of the things that you do?
So back in the old Windows 7 days, what we did was we actually created an accessibility icon, which we put on the desktop to try and make it easier for people to find the accessibility features that were kind of buried in Windows. Within the Office suite, we created a tab. We packaged the application and put a tab in there that was called accessibility so that people could find the accessibility checker. Now that we're kind of on the road of rolling out Windows 10 and Office 365, we don't need to rely so heavily on those things. We've actually got the Ease of Access Center. It makes it really easy for employees to find those features. The accessibility checker is right there beside the spell checker. Right? So the accessibility features are becoming much more apparent, which makes my job easier, because not everyone's comfortable declaring they have a disability. We want to create a culture at TD where people feel safe to ask for an accommodation, right? For a workplace accommodation of some kind. But we know not everyone is ever going to be comfortable doing that. So it's very important that we make it easy to find those features so they can self-accommodate wherever possible.
And I really like that word, self-accommodate, right? Being able to self-serve and empower ourselves. So you've been on this journey for a while. Everyone's at a different stage with their journey with this gig. We've been on ours, you've been on yours. What advice would you have for folks getting going? Where would you start? What advice would you have for people?
Sure. So I think Clint said it best. You need to start considering accessibility in the design of your desktop suite, your applications, the products and services you create for your customers. When you include it in the design phase, it really is not difficult. It's a simple process. I believe you said it best. If you wait till the night before you want to launch into production, you've got a real mess on your hands. Trying to bolt accessibility on the end of a project is incredibly expensive and painful, and won't get done. So think about it early. The other piece, if you're operating with Windows 10, Office 365, you already have some fairly powerful assistive technologies built in. Start exploring those things. Understanding how they work, you'll be amazed at how many of your existing employees will benefit from those already, and it'll actually start opening the door for you to be able to hire a more diverse workforce as well.
And you're in the middle of rolling out Office 365, you're 10,000 or so through. Are you seeing impact from that already?
Absolutely. I think we're at 12,000. So we've got a few more to go. But we're well down the path. And we leverage SCCM to identify kind of who's launching which features. And we did have people using Magnifier and some of the built-in features under Windows 7. And we're already seeing more people starting to pick up on those features within Windows 10 and Office 365. They're easier to find. People are tripping over them, and it's making a big difference.
So what's the future look like? What do you want to see?
I just saw it. I'm thrilled about the new features that are coming. It's the reading tools absolutely replace a number of discrete pieces of software we've used as assistive technologies in the past. So it's reducing the need for people to declare or ask for an accommodation. And I want to see that continue to those features grow and make it empower people to customize their own environments so that my team doesn't have to. I'm really excited about the convergence of mobile, AI, cloud. What we're seeing, Microsoft Seeing AI is a pretty incredible piece of software. And I think you'll see more of that in the future, right? As we allow people to actually take incredible computing power around with them in their pocket. Right? It certainly opens up a whole world to them. It's just incredible. And ideally, as people can self-accommodate more, they rely less on my team, so it saves the bank a little bit of money. But ultimately, I'd like to get to the point where we don't even need an assistive technologies team, and then I can retire.
Game on. Please give thanks to Bert for. Thank you so much. So, kind of fun to see how this has been moving. And I want to wallow in the last few minutes in the future, which we just started to talk about, which was the last of those 4 pillars, if you were paying attention, and what this really does and can mean. And I think we're beginning to see the impact of what Infusion can mean in terms of products and where we need to go. And I think the future does get incredibly exciting, where things are just inclusively built in. We don't have to go and spend 2 days trying to find a ramp for a bloody rental house. It is just built in by design. It becomes personalized. I do think of a world 5, 10, 15, 25 years ago where not just every taxi in London is accessible, but every taxi in Uber around the world, every airplane, every spaceship, let's even go there, because it is just better design. But there are some areas coming back to the more near term where we really want to infuse this. AI is probably the biggest one. If you look at the demos that were shown today, and you look at auto-alt text, you look at the captioning, you look at the design imagery, and you look at how it's picking certain icons based on words and context, that is all AI-provided features. And we've also seen this through some of the stuff that's been coming out through our own employees. We've had a bunch of really wicked hacks. You all hack? You know what hacks are, right? Yes, no? 48 hours pizza, coffee, no light, a problem set. We found through hacks that we've been able to generate quite, some amazing hacks. Seeing AI, if you haven't played with it, I encourage you to download it on your Fruity devices and give it a go. It's a very simple app, free, that was designed for the blind. And it describes the world around you. It will take a picture of a menu and read it out loud. No longer do you have to drag the candles over to, or deal with your parents doing this when they're trying to read what's on a restaurant menu. It will also describe faces and give an approximation of age, not always accurate, but really cool and quite fun in a social setting, as well as being very valuable, inclusive design. So it's just some of the important apps and features that have been coming through the lens of AI. So in May this year, we announced a new program. It's a $25 million 5-year program to give grants to individuals, organizations, nonprofits, academic institutions to develop in 3 scenarios: employment, modern life, daily life, and communication connection. 3 areas where we believe this tech can have an impact on the industry. Actually, our first wave of grant awardees were just announced. We haven't shared them externally yet, but the first winner is actually meeting with Satya and Adela today. So we're incredibly excited about this, and more excited at how it could accelerate innovation in this space, which is what we want to see. We think we've really hit the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the application of AI for disability. And the other is the hacking. And I do think that this has been probably one of our biggest learnings from 2 lenses. In 2014, we had 10 hacks and 75 people. And the winner of that hackathon, the Ability Hack, and also the company winner, was a hack we did with a guy called Steve Gleason, who's an NFL player in Louisiana. Anyone from Louisiana? Anyone know Steve Gleason? You're not cool. You gotta look him up, because he's awesome. In his 30s, he developed ALS, or MND, which atrophies your muscles slowly over a period of years. The only muscle that, for most folks, doesn't disintegrate are the eyes. Now, he uses his eyes now to move his wheelchair around thanks to that hack. It was very much duct tape and polystyrene in 2014, I want to be clear. It's evolved a little since then. But also, we've been able to weave some of the learning from this now research team, which it went on to be, into the core of Windows. So you've got eye control now in that ease of use center, right? $150, little piece of hardware, and off you go. Right? So very simple things that can come through a hackathon program. That program went from 10 projects, 75 in 2014, to in July this year, it grew to 250 projects and 1,500 people. And I'm excited to see, we're still filtering through some of those hacks, but there are some nuggets of joy in there, some real pleasers, and I can't wait to innovate more on some of those. But I want to stress the other impact that comes. You get the learning tools, the eye control, you get actually the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which, again, please do check that out. There's a very sassy, edgy video done by Zach Anna on YouTube, which is 6 minutes long. And if you watch anything today, I urge you to watch it, and I dare you not to giggle. It's fun. But the other, and in some ways more important benefit for us, is the impact that it's had on the culture of the company. If those 1,500 people walked into the tents this year, and they come with varying knowledge on accessibility, and I mean anywhere from expert to don't know anything about it, but I want to play. It's become a cool thing in the company. Accessibility is cool. And people want to innovate and take on human challenges. I had one person walk in and say, it's so good to meet you, Jenny. I can't wait to hack. It's so good to meet someone who's mute. Right. I have been called many things in my life. But let me give you a hint. Mute ain't a good word. Don't ever use it. They walked away knowing that, right? Our job is to educate very politely and delicately, but very bluntly. And that person and 1,500 more walked away with a bar of knowledge about disability that they didn't have prior. On every whiteboard is a big sticky thing object that says an inaccessible hack is whack. And it has clear descriptions on how to create an accessible hack. Every hack has to create a video that's 2 to 3 minutes long. That video should be closed captioned. That video, depending on the content, we also advise is audio described. We give clear advice on how to do that. If they're building code, to make it accessible code. And so everyone walks away with just an increased level of knowledge on accessibility. For our culture, with our strategic goals, and our core nerdy focus, that is crucial. So it's become a momentum and a force of nature within the company. So I want to lead by just showing you a quick video that covers that, and then I think we actually have a couple of minutes for questions if there are any. And I would encourage you to check out the book Ability Hack. That book is actually on our website, microsoft.com/accessibility, and I'll put up the slide with all the links in a minute. For free download, it's also on Amazon as well. But let me give you a quick sense of the hack before we open it up.
People walking around in a large tent. Employees working together at a whiteboard. A woman takes off a mixed reality headset. A book drops on a table that reads, The Ability Hacks. A lighted sign reads, Be Epic. Photos of teams from multiple countries. A glass door closes with a sign that says, Ability. Microsoft logo.
Lovely. So there's a bunch of links on here. These are also going to be available online, so don't panic if you don't capture all of them. You can get this deck with all of the link and contents. So with that, we've got about 5 minutes. If there are any questions, please come up to the microphone or make yourself known and we will loiter. And if not, we will close up and bid you adieu for your lunch. I'm sure everyone's starving. Any questions, folks? Come on up.
I was wondering for Outlook, you were saying that there is a read out loud option. Is that available in the mobile app as well? I haven't been able to find it.
We've been moving these capabilities across the system just as quickly as we can, but I'll go back and push on that one.
So Clint's answer was not yet, but we will go back and check on it. And know that a lot of we've had a systematic focus in how we build the feature and then span it out across platform and across mode. So.
I also had a question about like magnifying for Teams.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of sessions about Teams, so if we're trying to get people to use it, just making sure that everybody can see it, especially if you have 1 million channels, it can be kind of hard to find them.
Yeah, and I know the Teams guys ran a session yesterday, which was awesome to see, and I know there's a lot more coming out on Teams. One of the key things, Teams, Skype for Business, all of these, the key imperative for the communication channels, as well as to be able to use all our first-party, third-party AT is really important to the team. So I know the team, not Microsoft. Anyway, they're working on it. All right, any other questions? If you do have anything you want to check with Clint and the royalty that just stood on stage, bring it on. If not, let me sort of say a huge thank you on behalf of all of us for being here and spending your time. We know you have a lot of choice. We really appreciate that you invested it here. There are other sessions happening today. There are some this afternoon, actually with a dear friend and colleague of mine from one of the largest disability organizations that we have in the States. Will be here this afternoon, and there are others tomorrow as well. So please do check out those. Share it, spread the word for us, and have a great rest of Ignite. Thank you.